I would forget my refusals of the advances that others had made to me. Thus it is that, to take but one example, women in the end cost me dear. The time I used to devote to them I couldn't give to men, who didn't always forgive me. Is there any way out? Your successes and happiness are forgiven you only if you generously consent to share them. But to be happy, it is essential not to be too concerned with others. Consequently, there is no escape. Happy and judged, or absolved and wretched. As for me, the injustice was even greater. I was condemned for past successes. For a long time I had lived in the illusion of a general agreement, whereas from all sides judgments, arrows, mockeries rained upon me, inattentive and smiling. The day I was alerted, I became lucid. I received all the wounds at the same time and lost my strength all at once. The whole universe then began to laugh at me. That is what no man, except those who are not really alive, in other words, wise men, can endure. Spitefulness is the only possible ostentation. People hasten to judge in order not to be judged themselves. What do you expect? The idea that comes most naturally to man, as if from his very nature, is the idea of his innocence. From this point of view, we're all like that little Frenchman at Buchenwald who insisted on registering a complaint with the clerk, himself a prisoner, who was recording his arrival. A complaint. The clerk and his comrades laughed. "Useless, old man, you don't lodge complaints here." "But you see, sir," said the little Frenchman, "my case is exceptional. I am innocent." We're all exceptional cases. We all want to appeal against something. Each of us insists on being innocent at all costs, even if he has to accuse the whole human race and heaven itself. You won't delight a man by complimenting him on the efforts by which he has become intelligent or generous. On the other hand, he will beam if you admire his natural generosity. Inversely, if you tell a criminal that his crime is not due to his nature or his character, but to unfortunate circumstances, he will be extravagantly grateful to you. During the council speech, this is the moment he will choose to weep. Yet there is no credit in being honest or intelligent by birth, just as one is surely no more responsible for being a criminal by nature than for being a criminal by force of circumstance. But those rascals want grace. This is irresponsibility. And they shamelessly allege the justifications of nature or the excuse of circumstances, even if they are contradictory. The essential thing is that they should be innocent, that their virtues, by grace of birth, should not be in question, and that their misdeeds, born of a momentary misfortune, should never be more than temporary. As I told you, it's a matter of dodging judgment. Since it is hard to dodge it, tricky to get one's nature simultaneously admired and excused, they all strive to be rich. Why? Did you ever ask yourself? For power, of course, but especially because wealth shields from immediate judgment, takes you out of the subway crowd to enclose you in a chromium-plated automobile, isolates you in huge protected lawns, Pullman cars, first-class cabins. Wealth, cher ami, is not quite acquittal, but reprieve, and that's always worth taking. Above all, don't believe your friends when they ask you to be sincere with them. They merely hope you will encourage them in the good opinion they have of themselves by providing them with the additional assurance they find in your promise of sincerity. How could sincerity be a condition of friendship? A liking for truth at any cost is a passion that spares nothing and that nothing resists. It's a vice, at times a comfort, or a selfishness. Therefore, if you are in that situation, don't hesitate. Promise to tell the truth and lie as best you can. You will satisfy their hidden desire and doubly prove your affection. This is so true that we rarely confide in those who are better than ourselves. Rather, we are more inclined to flee their society. Most often, on the other hand, we confess to those who are like us and who share our weaknesses. Hence, we don't want to improve ourselves or be bettered, for we should first be bound to be judged in default. We merely wish to be pitied and encouraged in the course we have chosen. In short, we should like at the same time to cease being guilty and yet not to make the effort of cleansing ourselves. Not enough cynicism and not enough virtue. We lack the energy required for evil as well as that required for good. Do you know Dante? Really? Well, I'll be damned. Then you know that Dante accepts the idea of neutral angels in the quarrel between God and Satan. And he puts them in limbo, a sort of vestibule of his hell. We are in the vestibule, cher ami. Patience? You're probably right. It would take patience to wait for the last judgment. But there you are, we're in a hurry. So much in a hurry indeed that I was obliged to make myself a judge penitent. First, however, I had to make shift with my discoveries and put myself right with my contemporaries' laughter. From the evening I was called, for I was really called, I had to answer, or at least seek an answer. It wasn't easy. For some time I floundered. To begin with, that perpetual laugh and the laughers had to teach me to see clearly within me and discover at last that I was not simple. Don't smile. That truth is not so fundamental as it seems. What we call fundamental truths are simply the ones we discover after all the others. However that may be, after prolonged research on myself, I brought out the basic duplicity of the human being. Then I realised, as a result of delving in my memory, that modesty helped me to shine, humility to conquer, and virtue to oppress. I used to wage war by peaceful means, and eventually used to achieve, through disinterested means, everything I desired. For instance, I never complained that my birthday was overlooked. People were even surprised with a touch of admiration by my discretion on this subject. But the reason for my disinterestedness was even more discreet. I longed to be forgotten in order to be able to complain to myself. Several days before the famous date, which I knew very well, I was on the alert, eager to let nothing slip that might arouse the attention and memory of those on whose laps I was counting. Didn't I once go so far as to consider falsifying a friend's calendar? Once my solitude was thoroughly proved, I could surrender to the charms of a virile self-pity. Thus, the surface of all my virtues had a less imposing reverse side. It is true that in another sense my shortcomings turned to my advantage. The obligation I felt to hide the vicious part of my life gave me, for example, a cold look that was confused with the look of virtue. My indifference made me loved. My selfishness culminated in my generosities. I stopped there, for too great a symmetry would upset my argument. But after all, I presented a harsh exterior, and yet could never resist the offer of a glass of wine or of a woman. I was considered active, energetic, and my kingdom was the bed. I used to advertise my loyalty, and I don't believe there was a single person I loved that I didn't eventually betray. Of course, my betrayals didn't stand in the way of my fidelity. I used to knock off a considerable pile of work through successive periods of idleness, and I had never ceased aiding my neighbour, thanks to my enjoyment in so doing. But however much I repeated such facts to myself, they gave me but superficial consolations. On certain mornings I would get up the case against myself most thoroughly, coming to the conclusion that I excelled above all in scorn. The very people I helped most often were the most scorned. Courteously, with a solidarity charged with emotion, I used to spit daily in the face of all the blind. Tell me frankly, is there any excuse for that? There is one, but so wretched that I cannot dream of advancing it. In any case, here it is. I have never been really able to believe that human affairs were serious matters. I had no idea where the serious might lie, except that it was not in all this I saw around me, which seemed to me merely an amusing game or tiresome. There are really efforts and convictions I have never been able to understand. I always looked with amazement and a certain suspicion on those strange creatures who died for money, fell into despair over the loss of a position, or sacrificed themselves with a high and mighty manner for the prosperity of their family. I could better understand that friend who had made up his mind to stop smoking and through sheer willpower had succeeded. One morning he opened the paper, read that the first H-bomb had been exploded, learned about its wonderful effects, and hastened to the tobacco shop. To be sure, I occasionally pretended to take life seriously, but very soon the frivolity of seriousness struck me, and I merely went on playing my role as well as I could. I played at being efficient, intelligent, virtuous, a good citizen, shocked, indulgent, responsible, high-minded. In short, there's no need to go on. You've already grasped that I was like my Dutchmen, who are here without being here. I was absent at the moment when I took up the most space. I've never been really sincere and enthusiastic, except when I used to indulge in sports and in the army, when I used to act in plays which were put on for our own amusement. In both cases there was a rule of the game which was not serious, but which we enjoyed taking as if it were. Even now the Sunday games in an overflowing stadium and the theatre, which I loved with an unparalleled devotion, are the only places in the world where I feel innocent. But who would consider such an attitude legitimate in the face of love, death, and the wages of the poor? Yet what can be done about it? I could imagine the love of Isolde only in novels or on the stage. At times, people on their deathbed seem to me convinced of their roles. The lines spoken by my poor clients always struck me as fitting the same pattern. Hence, living among men without sharing their interests, I could not manage to believe in my commitments. I was courteous and indolent enough to live up to what was expected of me in my profession, my family, or my life as a citizen, but each time with a sort of indifference that spoiled everything. I liked my own life under a double code, and my most serious acts were often the ones in which I was the least involved. Wasn't it this, after all, for which, on top of my blunders, I could not forgive myself, which made me revolt most violently against the judgment I felt forming in me and around me, and that forced me to seek an escape?